Bem-vindos à Brotéria. Welcome to Brotéria. Today we'll be speaking in English as best we can. I hope there's no English-speaking native with us, because our invitee she's French, I'm Portuguese, so we're trying to speak in a foreign language, the both of us. And I pray on your mercy and hardness of heart, so that you may welcome our words. Before we start, while other people are still arriving, I'll just say a few words about two other booklets. So this is the last issue of Brotéria, the journal we publish here. This is the December issue. It has a different theme, so usually there's a different topics, and this one is devoted strictly to corruption and integrity, so it's quite of a different number. We are always talking about Eutopos, so these good places we are trying to look for. This lecture, it's called the Eutopos lecture, but we are very, very aware that not everything in our world is beautiful and good, and so we also take the time to study the problems we have to change. So if you're interested in learning a bit about corruption from different areas and from different points, you can always find some good papers in this last number of Brotéria journal. As I said, this particular series of lectures, it's called Eutopos, so it's a new Greek word, good places. We're looking for places where we can find hope, people that bring us a different take on reality, not naive, not in a kind of way, like I don't actually look at the problems, but in a way that kind of enriches the reality and brings us kind of possibilities and possibilities that we can travel and that we can explore together. Today's lecture will be given by Madame Marion Muller-Colard. In here, thank you a lot for coming. Just arrived today in Lisbon for the first time, so I'm sure we'll give her a very welcome and very warm welcome. The topic which she'll be discussing and probably disagreeing, because the topic was kind of imposed by us in a way, it's called The Ethics of Uneasiness. Let me just present her in a more thorough way. After obtaining a PhD from the Faculty of Protestant Theology at University of Strasbourg, Marion Muller-Colard was first a hospital chaplain before devoting herself to writing essays, stories and novels. She was a member of the National Consultative Ethics Committee from 2017 to 2023 and a member of the Independent Commission on Sexual Abuse in the Church. Today, she runs Ushered publishing and presents the program Écriture for French television. Her main titles published are L'autre Dieu, La Plante, La Menace et la Grâce, chez Ushered Fides in 2014, et L'Intranquillité chez Bayard 2015. Also, Les Grandissants, Ushered Fides 2021. So one of those books is this one, L'Intranquillité. How to translate this into English, that will be one of the issues. How to translate this into Portuguese, that could be another issue. We had quite a number of discussions on the correct translation. But it was this particular book, which belongs to Brotéria's library, so if you want to read it, just come over from Monday to Saturday and ask for the book, because it's available in here. And this book, we thought it was very provocative, and it kind of made us think that this series of lectures called Eutopos could also visit the possibility that uneasiness can be a good place. Typically, we think of uneasiness as a bad place. We spend all our lives, most of us, me at least, trying to run away from uneasiness and into peace. And Marion Muller-Colard brings in this essay, where she reads and dialogues with a number of important texts of Western tradition, this particular idea that grace is not necessarily peace, so that peace can be found that peace is not necessarily the only place where we can find grace and joyful and real life. So it's this problem that we thought it was very provocative and very inspiring to us that took us to invite and motivated us to invite Marion. We also want to thank Santander Foundation, sponsors these lectures and have been a tremendous partner and gives us the possibility of inviting people who come from Geneva, as Marion came this morning. And we thank you very much, Marion, for being here, and we give her a warm welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So first of all, I want to thank you warmly for your invitation, which honors me and which I hope to live up to, and to apologize in advance for my English and my very inadequate command of this language. As typical French girl, I grew up in a deplorable self-sufficiency that my many encounters and experiences of being disturbed have gradually, unfortunately, come to undo, but I'm afraid that to improve my English, it's a bit late. So in our common quest for a world that is, dare we say it, better, at least not worse, and simply viable, and in the face of the very legitimate anxiety aroused by current events, I'd like to invite us this evening to turn our intuitions on their head and resort to a counterintuitive and a priori unfriendly weapon, embarrassment. In French, the word embarras refers not only to a difficulty, as the word uneasiness sounds to me, but also to the discomfort and embarrassment that this difficulty causes. And before considering embarrassment as a paradoxical resource, I would like to refer to two very formative experiences from which I will draw a number of observations and avenues that I would like to share with you tonight. First, my 6 years as a member of the French Ethics Committee, and second, my participation to the Commission on Sexual Abuse in the French Church, known in France as the Commission Sauvée after its president. What struck me in the testimonies of victims of sexual assault in the church, but also in the exchanges with certain men of the church, was that some of them gave the impression of having acquired new elements of language, which they had adopted because they were forced by the necessities of communication. Communication which they hoped to take advantage to appease the anger of the countless victims of not only sexual but also institutional violence. This institutional violence, perpetrated by men more interested in the survival of the institution than in justice, was killing the victims a second time. The wall of the closed face that feigns empathy by skillfully tilting its head and using automatic language, the same language that ChatGPT could produce if asked how to respond to a victim of sexual violence. This face that is no longer a face, this face that is in fact a wall, this face is abominable, sometimes more abominable, as some victims have testified, than the face of the aggressor. If the religious word conversion has a meaning here, it's no longer to indicate the passage from unbelief to belief, but the passage from impenetrability, from indifference, from self-protection to being hurt. The posture is reassuring, giving the impression of following a protocol, but simulate cannot respond to the call for a real encounter. In these cases of extreme suffering related to sexual violence, but also in less acute cases. It's also true in education, in politics, and indeed in any situation that demands our attention, our sensitivity, and our commitment. If injustice doesn't hurt us, nothing can change. We have to be hurt by the instigation of speeches, by the suffering of victims of violence, by the lives snatched from us and forced onto the roads of exile. The least we can do is be hurt. To be hurt is not to be desperate. The only thing that is desperate is not to be hurt. The ethics of embarrassment begins with our own ability not to react too quickly, to take the blow, to remain silent in the face of the unspeakable, to acknowledge the scandal. It's embarrassing. It reminds us of our own powerlessness, and it's extremely uncomfortable. We'd like to find a solution. Act or deny. Deny when we can't act. Deny when the cost of action seems exorbitant. But perhaps our first benchmark is to accept that we need to lose our bearings so that the encounter can be preserved as a genuine face-to-face encounter. The first benchmark is to accept that we are lost and hurt, and to see that our power can be based first and foremost on a sense of powerlessness and rebellion. Assuming the embarrassment here means renouncing magic formulas, recipes, tricks that work every time and that would exempt us from the immense intention required by otherness and contact with a radical, unprecedented singularity. This is a major daily challenge in medicine and pedagogy, a challenge that cuts across all disciplines, but which can also offer us spaces for recreation, attention then leads us to deglobalization that, by reducing scales, strengthens our ability to act. Last week I was taking part in a symposium on commitment, and the feeling of powerlessness was an insistent complaint of the participant. I believe that we need to develop our ability to change scale between the information we receive on a planetary scale and the action we can take, often on a less global, much smaller scale, and also to develop multi-scale actions to protect us from discouragement. If we take part in actions on very large scales, we risk being deprived of observing the benefits of our actions, which needs to be compensated, which needs to be compensated for by actions in shorter circuits that reinforce our satisfaction in taking action. We don't have to choose between giving 100 euros to an anti-poverty association, also we won't feel the impact of this donation, or 5 euros to a person who happens to be in our path and needs immediate help. it will take too long to list all the different situations in which the work of the ethics committees in French, in which I took part, led me to feel embarrassed and to resist the temptation to extricate myself as quickly as possible at any cost, sometimes at the price of the factitious resolution, a postponement, or even a worsening of the problem. It would be a pity if empathy and compassion were to dull and lead us to a growing indifference to the fate of others and to situations of injustice. The younger generations continue to challenge us with their rebellious spirit, and we need them to do so. But it's also roaring to reduce the temporality of any response, which needs to be weighed, rested, and matured. We have often been troubled by the different temporalities between ethical reflection, which requires a lot of time, especially to listen and observing the changes it provokes, and the short political time, which has its own agenda. We have ethics as no other agenda than a continuous maturation. The ethics of embarrassment then become an opportunity not to respond to the blinding dictates that precipitate ill-considered, undebated decisions. The French political impasse in which we find ourselves today seems to confirm my point, and it's a never-ending story, because now everything is indeed becoming urgent. It also sometimes means not responding to frustration, postponing, abandoning the posture of savior, renouncing seduction to respond appropriately, running the risk of displeasing, the embarrassment of being misunderstood or unloved. The philosopher Paul Ricoeur once confided in one of his students, Olivier Abel, who went on to become a major French philosopher. There are two things in existence that are difficult to accept. The first is to be mortal, okay, and the second is not to be loved by everyone. But what I would like perhaps to add is that if these two conditions are inescapable and if they are unpleasant, they are no less desirable, because both, each in its own way, guarantee diversity. Life, including intellectual and spiritual life, depends on plurality, on being many and not always the same. Embarrassment as a responsibility is also understood as a form of courage, both religiously and politically, since the associations between the two are strongly manifested in geopolitical situations that determines many global issues today, and in alliance between religious fundamentalism and populism, as seen on the American continent. The theology behind the promotion of presidents like Trump or Bolsonaro is so-called prosperity theology, inherited from a misunderstanding of the reformer Jean Calvin doctrines of the justification by faith, and which sees material success as a sign of divine election. Admittedly, the Bible's immense library contains writings supporting retributive theology, and its application immediate or deferred. The righteous man is gratified by God with a good and happy life. The wicked man is punished by the eruption of misfortune in his life. but it will be dishonest not to mention all the biblical books and extracts that call into question the validity of this system, starting with the book of Job, to which I dedicated my theology thesis. The theology of retribution avoids all embarrassment. It's mechanical, so to speak, and extremely comforting. But it is neither more nor less than an insult to reality and history. Job knows it. All the suffering righteous throughout history know it. This bad theology makes an alliance with unbridled capitalism, and today it meets and reinforces the most unabashed megalomanias. It manipulates the most vulnerable minds and makes them the first victims of this system, convincing them to submit to these new chosen ones of God, hoping that a little of this grace beyond their reach and their bank account might trickle down to them. Unfortunately, our need for adoration is impossible to satiate. But it's also a problematic opportunity to abandon courage and responsibility while reverting to exclusively moral obsessions that distract us from today's real political issues. For a long time, religion was the exclusive guide to the good, understood as moral. Until recently, there was no gap between the religious prohibitions inherited from Judeo-Christianity and the legal prohibitions of Western countries. In France, for example, adultery was only decriminalized in 1975, and it was only in 1982 that the same country abolished a Vichy law that had defined a different sexual majority for homosexuals, thereby multiplying the number of convictions against them. Until recently, therefore, the law was based on a tacit definition of the moral good that was in the line with religious prescriptions. Today's climate crisis is destabilizing these associations. A multitude of actions are authorized and not condemned by law. Actions which we know to be deleterious and dangerous, but which have become so commonplace in our lifestyles that suddenly penalizing them seems unthinkable. Today, the question of what is good has shifted from morals to habits, or to put it more directly, from the moral, in the sense of morality inherited from traditional religious systems, to the vital. If I allow myself such a caricatured and therefore excessive opposition, it's because it points to religion's disengagement from the vital, whereas in-depth study of biblical texts shows, on the contrary, that moral codes are most often associated with vitality. This is the case, for example, of the laws of sexual purity or impurity, which in the legislative texts of the Hebrew Bible are mainly aimed at encouraging the birth rate in a context of demographic threat to the small tribe of Israel in whose midst they were written. We can, and in my opinion we must, reread this text today in this context of a birth rate imperative to the survival of the people. From this angle, rather than that of morality, the prohibition of homosexuality can be understood in the same way as the prohibition of masturbation, and in the same way as the laws of impurity that isolate women during their periods, because a menstruating woman manifests in her body a punctual infertility, from which the community wanted to be protected. What is serious for the small tribe of ancient Israel, threatened on all sides by empires dominant in numbers and means, is every chance lost for birth. For each birth gives consistency and increases the community and consequently the chances of survival of its culture. What's fascinating, moreover, is that the three sexual prohibitions that don't correspond to this criterion of promoting and protecting the birth rate, incest, adultery, and prostitution, are all broken at least once in the narrative biblical texts. The Hebrew principle of pikuach nefesh means priority to life, applies as much to avoiding death at all costs by providing an exception to the application of the commandments when it comes to protecting life, as it does to the opportunity to procreate. Biblical characters such as the daughters of Lot or Tamar, Judah's daughter-in-law, violate these sexual prohibitions in response to an imperative to procreate, a priority to life via the birth rate, and none of them are condemned. To put it briefly, in the Hebrew Bible, when it comes to procreating, anything goes. The law borders, but life overflows. The question for us today is, what means protecting life? If the primary vocation of a religion is to promote vitality, when we must think differently about its commandments, which at present express the obsolete idea of protecting vitality by defending models of marriage or family as the guarantors of a devitalized moral order. As the atheist French philosopher François Julien writes, Christianity must be a resource. Like other thinkers today, some Christians, some not, he holds on to Christianity as a subversive lever that has nevertheless been deactivated. For today, institutional Christianity seems to be dying for fear of dying. It clings to the skin of its culture and its identity, but without flesh and sap, no longer able to infuse the world with the message of vitality that it carries. And the philosopher writes, if there can be knowledge about life, isn't living precisely about escaping this knowledge and daring to be infinitely possible? And isn't this precisely what the Bible is all about? The prevalence today of fundamentalist religious systems and their political alliances should give us cause for alarm on more than one count. This pleasurable path to power and the simplified reading of the word are also paths to blindness and disempowerment. The promotion of the retributive system responds to the categorical and anxious refusal of embarrassment in the face of uncertainty, and the quenching of great existential anguish. I experienced this when I was a hospital pastor. It's more comfortable psychologically and spiritually to cobble together an equation of meaning than to face up to the vertigo of the absurd. Even if this cobbling together designates an easy culprit, even if you have to shoulder the guilt yourself, anything but nonsense. The theologian Paul Tillich, in his book The Courage to Be, clearly showed that an adult phase, which is more an impulse to participate in the world than in fortress of certainties, is a phase that confronts anxieties, integrating them without disaggregating them into immutable systems of meaning. In addition to being deleterious to the individual who suffers the double penalty of misfortune and guilt, the association of evil and misfortune also entails another danger. By associating religious piety with the divine response of protection against misfortune, the retributive system is not only a tool for manipulating conscience, but also for lulling them to sleep. If God is just and powerful, why commit oneself beyond the prescribed piety? More broadly, the theology of an all-powerful God, administrator of human happiness and unhappiness in relation to human vices and virtues, places man in a history that eludes him and over which he has no control, and for which, consequently, he is not responsible. These theologies' only horizon are to be satisfied with one's own religious exemplarity and to convince oneself of one's election, a comfortable psychic and narcissistic position, let's face it. However, it seems to me that a major challenge of this crisis we are going through today is to aim for more than just getting by, and instead to bring to light our interdependencies on a human scale, but also on the scale of living beings. The ethical dilemma, then, is to take up Alyosha's phrase from Brothers Karamazov: you have to love life more than the meaning of life. This embarrassment naturally leads us not to be petrified, but to our responsibility. I quote this wonderful passage from the French philosopher Simone Weil. Praise God and compassion for creatures. There is no contradiction when God in creating has abdicated. We must approve of God's creative abdication and congratulate ourselves on being a creature, a second cause, with the right to act in this world. This unfortunate man lies on the road, half-starved. God has mercy on him, but cannot give him a morsel of bread. But here I am, fortunately not God. I was hungry and you fed me. God can beg for bread, but not give it to them. The ethic of embarrassment is therefore ethical insofar as the assumed complicity does not lead to demobilization. Embarrassment itself is often a force for withdrawal. Founding an ethic on it offers to positives it as a prerequisite for lucid, sometimes subversive action, if need be, but not automatically. It's a fault of French Protestantism, from which I come, that it necessarily takes the lead against the current. It's also necessary to be able to envisage that the current sometimes leads safely to port. It is clarity, so dear to Michel de Certeau, which I believe he borrowed from Catherine of Siena, that enables us to get out the trouble through actions, even if we risk making a mistake. he points out. It's often up to us to make bets, but it's up to us to make them reasonable. It's not just up to us to win them, but it's always up to us to try. Commitment much often comes from injury. To respond is not to make up or repair, but to participate, to refuse indifference in both senses of the word, in the sense of contempt and resignation, and in the sense of inability to make a difference. My commitment as a publisher today is to develop a pedagogy of complexity, in other words, to offer the simplest possible entry point into complexity, so that it's not overwhelming and can even be stimulating for thought and encounter. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very provocative and very interesting. So thank you so much. Have a bit of time for questions, remarks, clarification or otherwise, so that we can participate. The whole point of these lectures is not just to come and take everything home, is also to give back and be able to dialoguing with each other, be able to appropriate what has been said and to move forward. So I would like to encourage you to express ideas, thoughts, something that sounded terribly wrong and I'm completely against, something that sounded absolutely genius and I will want to take with me home. I'm not gonna force João Norton to speak, even though his major author was quoted. I'm not gonna. So I'll start. It's my function, isn't it? So I'm gonna go back to this in a way. So yeah, we started by ethics of uneasiness, and then you proposed us to change from uneasiness into embarrassment, and you kept telling us that being embarrassed is not necessarily a bad place to be. It's probably the only place where we can be in order to accept and deal, if I may say so. So yeah, we can deal with complexity. So if we are not embarrassed by the complexity, we won't be able to advance, we won't be able to make way, and we'll always be in a way swallowed, or I'm not sure what the right word would be, by complexity. So my question on this, of course, if I got it right, please do correct me if I got it wrong, is if the whole goal is, like Ricard was saying, is to be loved, what do we gain by risking not being loved and risking this place of embarrassment instead of just doing like everybody does, which is much reasonable, I believe, which is just to pretend that everything is all right and keep on going with our usually daily lives? Sorry. Non, ma question c'était pourquoi devrait-on nous engager dans une éthique de l'embarras et pourquoi ne pas rester tout simplement, parce que vous avez dit que la question c'est de pouvoir gérer la complexité, donc l'embarras, parce que c'est le seul moyen qu'on puisse gérer la complexité. Comment peut-on faire, pourquoi doit-on risquer ce saut? Est-ce que c'est juste une question utilitaire de pouvoir gérer la complexité des affaires, ou est-ce qu'il y a quelque chose d'autre, que c'est une propos juste pour prendre la tête centrale, quoi?
Ça va être difficile pour moi de répondre en anglais. So I don't want to make a receipt with embarrassment, but it seems to me that to avoid it at any cost, as I said, is dangerous, and I don't want to mean that embarrassment is the only way, but to put into light that our first reflex is to avoid it, and that makes some issues very that makes some ways of taking decision too short to be fair. And we see it in political French life so much, but in church too, that what we fear as to be confronted sometimes, and especially when we're fearing to die, and not to take in charge the serious situation, and to accept this time of very uncomfortable way because people do not agree. If I just take the example, when someone is not agree with me, I don't like it. I hate that. But that main situations in which I had the occasion to grow up was coming from this kind of situation. That's just what I want to say. It was a little bit long just to say that, maybe.
Well, if it makes us grow up, I think that's a good deal. So, yes, just a minute. É preciso microfone, não é? Queres o meu? Queres outro? So, this gentleman over there with the right hand on. À esquerda, à esquerda.
I mean, uneasiness, speaking from personal experience, something that has made me very uneasy lately and a bit embarrassed was having become a Catholic as a neuroscientist in his 40s and sitting amongst the table, I was reading Thomas Aquinas for 20 years, but I formalized it recently, and I remember sitting down at a table with 15 of my colleagues, all of them having, we're all neuroscience PhDs. And a friend of mine pulled me out of the closets without my willingness because she pulled out, I was wearing a St. Benedict cross under my. She was like, "What are you wearing?" And I had to explain to 15 of them that I'd been baptized 5 months before. And it was a very, very strange conversation because all of a sudden they thought that, my politics had completely changed. Now I was no longer pro-choice and blah, blah, blah. So the hardest conversations I've had were precisely on that, and it's been a very, very strange, voyage for me. Even just to wrap up, when I did my adult catechesis, the priest asking us what makes you embarrassed to say that you're Catholic in public, and I was all the shit that the church does, and all the political positions, because I am embarrassed being a very smart, or I hope, smart, 41-year-old scientist saying I took this choice as an adult because I wasn't baptized as a child. So just to share that, it's especially in this case of when you are talking to people who come from have very different mindsets of how the world works. Sometimes and they're all smart and they all want to learn, but uneasiness can make for very difficult conversation.
I do understand. But there is so many different ways of being Christian. And when I realized that Christian people are electing someone like Trump, and I'm a Christian too, what does it mean? You don't say anything about you when you say you're Christian. That's the reality of Christianity today. So that's... I'm sorry about that, but I have to... I have to see that there are Christians who are choosing Trump again.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, my question is really to contrast your experience in France, how the Catholic Church dealt with issues of sexual abuse, and how we did in Portugal.
Yes, I don't know about this.
Yeah, perhaps I just summarize, and this is my own view, so please free not, to have a contrasting view. I don't know, but all, concentrated on this 0.5%, which, of course, an adult that abuses a child deserves to be treated and deserves to be, to be followed, but not dismissed. But the point is that, the same people that accuse the Catholic Church of abuses, they didn't care about the other 99.5%, because, the intention was really to hurt the church, and not to dismiss the church, right? But, they didn't really care about the children, they cared about an attack to the church, and this is my own view. Unfortunately, the way that the Catholic Church in Portugal dealt with the issue was also very unprofessional, very immature, because they didn't go to the core of the center of the issue that was to defend the children, and and they didn't really dealt, and again, this is my opinion, with the real issue that is the children again, and the victims. So perhaps you can contrast what happened in France. Was it better or was it worse? And again, this is just my own view. And was it the same that the people that attacked the church, did they care really about the issue? Did they care really about the children, or just an attack to the church?
The Commission Sauvé was mandated by the church itself, and we had no intention to attack church. You can accuse me because I'm a Protestant, but most of the others were Catholics, and Sauvé himself, and he was so hurt to discover all we had to discover. So we received exactly the same accusations you express right now, and I don't know about the history in your country, but I just can say that these accusations were unfounded, because I saw and I still see how the Catholic members of the Commission had to suffer. I had to suffer too because of the children, and I don't care to attack Catholic Church, because Protestants need Catholic to have someone to protest again, so oh, that's a joke, but I believe in diversity, I don't want any church, any religion to disappear. But I could understand that people would suspect me to have an interest to say, bad church, I have the good one. Okay, you can suspect me, but you could not suspect Sauvé, neither most of the others. They were so hurt, and they would rather not discover the things they had to discover. You can believe me or not. I can say more.
Não, se calhar deixamos para uma segunda volta. Obrigado. But if you are taking as a given fact that diversity of voices is important, we'll try and listen at least from the first turn different voices, and then we'll circle back if needed. Please go ahead, Joanna.
Thank you very much. This was really food for thought for a very long time. I was told recently that most people cannot live in a state of conflict, so that people tend to avoid conflict as much as possible. And my question is about how do we teach this? How do we teach people to be able to live while feeling uncomfortable and while feeling that they are not being loved permanently? And this comes from two different places. One, as a parent, because I think for all parents it's very, very uncomfortable when our kids are sad or unhappy, and our temptation is to tell them, no, you're not, like it's fine, oh, it's not that bad. So we really don't welcome that feeling of, yes, they are feeling really bad, because we can feel bad. We want them to feel good so that we feel good. And so that's one thing, is like how we teach people, how we teach our children to live and to accept that things are not well, and that they are allowed to feel sad be loved, and they cannot speak up for themselves anymore because they are too afraid every day of their lives. And I really don't know how to teach it, and I would really like to have your insight on this. Thank you.
Thank you for a very good question. And of course, I don't have the response, but I would say just an example. I think, first of all, we need maturation to learn that. You can learn that in one time, but I think we all can do this experience that sometimes just to be pleasant or to be loved or to avoid conflict, you say something or you do not say something, and after you don't feel good with yourself. And what I'm used to say is that I can lose friends, I can lose a job, I can lose many things, but I can't lose myself. And when you're making this experience several times, that the risk you run is to lose yourself, not to be able to face yourself in the mirror. I made this experience twice at least, and now I don't want to experience that again. So I remember this experience when I feel embarrassed in front of someone who challenged me, or I do not agree, or lead me to make something that I judge unfair. And I take a breath and I just say, okay, I had to say that 2 weeks ago. I can lose this job, but I can't lose myself. So now you can choose. I can leave. And now I'm just, so I'm a publisher, and I'm republished very famous letters from captivity of the Dietrich Bonhoeffer. You might know him or not, I don't know. But he was killed by Nazis. And he has so beautiful letters that he wrote before being killed. And for me, it's a way to improve, to read these testimonies. That's a way to improve. I don't say that we can know for sure how we would act if we had to make some choices so extreme like he had to do, but we can improve by reading these people. And with little things, that's kind of sport, you know. I don't know how to say.
I was just wondering why you chose to think through the word embarrassment and not if it's the same thing, if there is some nuances and not shame or la honte. Where you draw the line.
It was very difficult for me, all these words, you know, because it's not my native language and I don't know how it sounds to you, and it's not your native language neither, maybe, so it was kind of a middle way. But shame is very interesting too, because it's the thing we're trying to avoid at most. And I remember having read Lacan, the psychoanalyst, who said at the end of one of his lessons, I'm here to make you ashamed too. And I was thinking that was really provocative, but it's interesting to be able to assume that sometimes, and not for pleasure, we have to assume that somehow people will be ashamed, or we have to be ashamed. And I remember one of my colleagues, a pastor, he was preaching, and suddenly someone came into the church to ask money to people, and someone very quick lead the guy to the exit, and the pastor, my colleague, was trying to continue to keep calm, and suddenly he stopped. I say, I'm sorry, I cannot. I'm so ashamed, I'm so embarrassed. And he had nothing to say more, nothing. My father his father was a pastor and is very far away from church, like most of children of pastor, I have to say. And by chance, he was at this ceremony, this cult, in this temple, and he said that was the beautiful time he had to live in church. And that what missed quite often in the Commission Sauvé, because what I said is very important. It's not only the aggressors, it's the institutional answer, not answer. Because the men, most, not all, men of church, we are not going through this shame. We have to be ashamed, everybody anyway, and trying to put it to put it together very quick and to say. I remember a victim who told me that when she went to explain what happened, the guy said, l'archevêque.
The Archbishop.
Well, yeah.
The Archbishop told her when she went up to the Archbishop.
He told her, okay, but now I think it's time to forgive. Okay. Could I decide when it's time for me? No. And when she went to the exit, he offered her a chapelet, un chapelet.
The rosary.
Yeah, and said, you will take a little memory for your patient here, won't you? Oh my God. And she was killed again. So sometimes to accept to be ashamed is the best way to love. I can't say anything.
I was wondering what might be the difference between the ethics of embarrassment and plain ethics. So in the sense that an ethical behavior always presupposes some sort of autonomy or taking the matter into your own hands or some renouncement, some independent thought. So I was wondering if is it embarrassment just an intrinsic characteristic of ethics?
Je suis pas sûre d'avoir compris. Je crois que j'ai compris, mais je suis pas sûre.
La question c'est pourquoi l'éthique là-bas et pas seulement juste l'éthique, parce que dans son avis, l'éthique elle-même elle suppose ça. Donc la question c'est pourquoi peut-être le modèle anthropologique qui est supposé.
My experience is that even in ethical thought and reflections we had in the highest committee in France, the reflex was to find absolute solutions. And it was a very, it was the main difficulty between two sides in the committee, because some of us were thinking we have to propose something anyway, and some of us, and I was the second part in the second team, were thinking we have to help to think, not to offer solutions, you know, and that might be the difference between just ethic and ethic of embarrassment. And as you said, it's supposed to have kind of, I was thinking by listening to you that the ethic of embarrassment can be, je vais pas arriver à dire ça en anglais, mais ça ouvre aussi la possibilité à des gens qui ne sont pas des grands intellectuels de participer aussi à une forme éthique, presque parfois malgré eux, mais en offrant une leçon en fait d'humilité à des gens qui croient être supérieurs parce qu'ils réfléchissent beaucoup, quoi.
So, Marion is saying that the possibility of simple people, simple-minded people, not intellectuals, being able to have an ethical behavior and not necessarily thought but mostly behavior, it's opened by this possibility that the ethics is not just plain ethics but an ethics that takes into consideration that it's not the ethics of strong people but of people who are embarrassed, and that's not a bad starting point but actually the better one. I'm not sure if I got it completely right.
I experienced that when I was working in hospital, that some lessons I received was coming from people almost dying, but having a curiosity or a capacity of listening, of encounter people that was much superior than some very important people I used to work with. You understand what I mean now?
Sort of.
Okay, sorry. I can't do better.
Pedro Mané. So we'll take two questions. Pedro, Franco, Wolfram, e depois a Mané também. You can take two and then you answer to whatever you want. On va prendre deux questions de suite et puis vous prenez ce que vous voulez. Quoi.
Ok.
Ou non, vous préférez ne pas faire ça?
Si, on va essayer.
Força, Pedro.
Thank you so much for your talk. It was very moving in many ways. And my question is a very simple one, I think.
Thank you.
Usually people think about embarrassment and uneasiness as being opposite or at odds with self-reliance. But what I'm taking from your conference is that living with uneasiness is a form of confidence and self-reliance. Is that right?
Self-reliance, c'est la confiance en soi. In a second time, might be. Because you go through the embarrassment, maybe the shame or the powerlessness, and experiences this, you can experience that it's a way to encounter and to grow up. But first of all, you don't want to go. I remember when I was working in hospital, there was a woman who was crying a lot, and everybody was avoiding to go in front of her room because we were all feeling so powerlessness. And finally, I said to myself, I can't avoid this anymore, so I'm going. And I was there, and I could not say anything because she was crying. And finally, I said, I feel so powerlessness. Just to say, I'm here with you, and I feel so bad not being able to help you. And finally, we could do something together just because I made this step, this difficult step, having nothing to offer. Just, I'm here with you and I feel so bad because I can't do anything. And and I learned by this experience, I was very young, I was 23, by this experience, by having the courage to go in spite of the discomfort, I learned that it was a way to be in relation with her. And finally, yes, it grew up my self-confidence that even when I don't feel so good, like tonight, for example, speaking in English, something can maybe happen, you know? I am.
If I may intervene, but in the story you just told us in the hospital, there was something that you had to offer and that you gave that woman, which was your company. She was crying by herself. At the end of the story, you just told us, she was not crying by herself, she was crying and you were with her. And so, in a way, there's something to be done, even though if it's with a sense of powerlessness and embarrassment, but there's something that we can act on to share the fragility. Am I going too far away from
No,
her?
no, it's not to act, it's just to be.
Okay.
And to believe that you are what you are, and you take part of diversity, and just to be able to say, okay, I'm here. That's it.
Monet.
I was thinking about you were saying experiments. Do you think there is a place for pretense to like to pretend you have you don't have you are not ashamed? So you were saying like truly believing you are worth it, so you can show you're ashamed to be honest in some sense. But even when you don't believe it, but somehow you have tools that teach you how to experiment it and put it to exposure you to what are the results of being yourself. Like that is a very counter. Like you don't have like a natural inclination to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about the way you teach something to someone. You never start with you don't start big.
Mm-hmm.
You start with small little exercises that are possible and they're doable. So can you pretend as an exercise? Can you exercise through pretense to deal with shame? Yeah, that was.
Est-ce que c'est un, je crois que j'ai compris, mais est-ce que c'est un exercice? Est-ce que je pense qu'on peut exercer ça? C'est ça la question?
La question c'était aussi si l'on peut faire ça de façon fausse. Donc on peut faire comme un comédien et jouer ça sans le faire réellement.
C'est ça la question?
C'est ce que j'ai compris.
Ah, ok. Oui, pretend au sens. Oui, d'accord, ok.
You can clarify the question if you prefer.
I think it's a bit dangerous because I do believe that sincerity is something very precious, and I will not take this way to pretend, as you say, because you could totally break the purpose, you know. But sometimes I do not pretend, but I force a little bit. I do it. I'm a very bad manager, you know, and I have to manage a little team. And when I came, there were very big tensions because everybody was afraid to be guilty for something, and it was fighting every time. It's not me. And so I forced a little bit when I realized I made mistake to say, okay, it's me, my mistake, and so now how will we go on? Just go on together. And finally, after 1 year, they begin to do that, to say, okay, I think it's my fault, and they realize that nobody dies, and that we're just we just want the same thing all together, and so whose fault, I don't care, but we have to go on, and it's so pleasant to be at this point today. So pretend no, but force a little bit just to modelize behavior in a team. That can work.
So have last two questions. With the red shirt here. Thank you so much. Aqui, desculpa. Esta menina estava aqui antes.
Isso já está.
Desculpa, não tinha visto então. Peço imensa desculpa.
Bon, bah deux alors.
E depois eu- Força.
Thank you for the lecture. So my question is, how can we as a church, like the world is complex, people are complex, and we tend to see in the church, people are falling into a very simple truth. We see this all over, like traditional church is growing in all the places, especially here in Portugal, I can see it. But we need to see the people more than just, just because he's homosexual or. My question is, how can we as a church? I don't want to use the word woke, but how can we accept complexity without being woke? Woke in the sense like to tolerate the other, like accept everything.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know if you understand the question.
Yes, I do. Wow.
Good luck.
Thank you. Okay, it seems that our religion is based on Bible. Okay, we do agree about that. And diversity and complexity is totally part of the Bible because it's a very large Bible. That's not one book Bible. It's so I think that the work of rereading Bible and never stop rereading Bible and wondering what is going through ages and what it's not is for me kind of guideline, but it's not a receipt too, but it's just to work and to it's the same, not to be afraid to say I need time to have an opinion about that. We are always challenged to have opinion, to say I'm okay, I'm not okay, it's fair, it's unfair. It's whoa. Why? Why should we have an opinion one time for every time about everything? And to say, okay, I'm just okay. In Greek we say epoche, just to have a kind of suspension of judgment and to say, let's try something. Let me some time to see if it's okay and what I do think about that. That's a very big difficulty with ethical decisions because when you make a step, you can't do it back after that. But why? We can maybe also, we can be okay with people who need time to accept some things that I do accept very easily. I'm not sure it's an answer to your question, but maybe a point would be not to want to uniformiser,
Okay.
uniform, I don't know.
To make everything equal? Not to force everything to become the same thing?
It's not because we are a church, one church. Let's say we are one church tonight, okay? It's not because we are one church that we have to be agreed, to agree, everybody to have the same sensitivity, but just to deal with and to have time. Je sais pas si c'est vraiment très clair ce que je raconte, mais parce que je pense que ce qui dit, c'est que du coup le travers, ce serait de tout accepter, de dire que tout est ok, c'est ça en fait, voilà. Et ça, ce travers, il vient aussi de l'incapacité d'une volonté d'uniformisation et de dire si on est une église, on est tous d'accord et on a tous la même sensibilité et la même politique, quoi.
Well, I think she told it better than I can, but she insists that I try again. So what I think Marion is trying to say is that by the fact that we are that we belong to the same church, we don't all have to think the same things and the same way, and so there's this complexity that we are talking about when we are facing reality, maybe a reality inside the community, and it's not a problem to be able to pertain to the same church even though we think different things. No?
Right.
Okay.
That could protect to be okay with everything without thinking. Might be. No. You don't seem to be convinced.
No,
I'm sorry.
I see where you're coming from, but as a Roman Catholic, the Pope is supposed to teach. And if he's doing the wrong teaching, then Catholics will say he's woke. But he has to teach because he's, well, you just said you're Protestant, so Catholics, we see the Pope as a teacher, as a pontiff, so he has the magisterial function power. But we see a lot of backlash against the Pope these days because I think he's supposed to write and to teach, but he's also very open. So it's hard for half of the Catholics or in the Western countries to see how the Pope is saying things in a broadly manner.
Yes, but it's the same. He's too open for some Catholics and not enough for others, you know, so...
Thank you so much. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the talk. You touched upon a lot on religion and morality, like what is right. We get guide from our religion that what is right. But I really want to know your stance on like what makes us uneasy also comes from like it's different in each culture as well. Like I don't belong from the Western countries, so my question to you is what is your stance on what makes us uneasy also comes from the culture and not only from the religion. Like it's different in each culture as well. So what's your take on that?
Qu'est-ce qui vient aussi juste de la culture et pas forcément de la religion
Oui,
dans...
parce que comme elle ne vient pas du monde occidental,
Oui.
elle trouve qu'il y a aussi des uneasiness qui viennent pas, qui sont pas des questions
Oui.
religieuses, mais d'autres genres.
Ok.
Oui, vas-y, vas-y.
C'est difficile de répondre à ça.
Take your time. We know this is a complex question, and complex issues demand us to have a little bit of time. We learned that tonight. There's a last question over there. We're gonna take. Was it? Yeah. No. Yeah. Okay. So after we take this answer, I'm just filling in the silence so that Marion can think. No. Just go 2 minutes. Fine. Thanks so much. Do you wanna give it a try on this question or?
Oui, mais en français.
Oui.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Je pense que un des facteurs très compliquants.
One of the issues that makes this question of yours really complicated and difficult.
Non, ce qui est le facteur compliquant une des grandes questions pour moi, c'est d'affronter aussi dans la culture grecque en fait, il y a quelque chose de très polarisé à partir de Platon qui est renforcé par Descartes. Donc ça va pas forcément avoir cette polarisation.
In Greek culture, and since Plato, and then it kept on going until Descartes, there's a huge polarization in between culture and religion.
Good or bad, and just polarization. And it seems to me that it's a very big cause of uneasiness, that we are stuck